Hi, students. This is Dr. Aluya. Welcome back to the use of English and communication skills. The topic for today's lesson is communication barriers. The three objectives that I would want you to achieve from this lesson include: one, you should be able to define communication barriers. Two, explain the different types of communication barriers. And three, give examples of the different types of communication barrier. I will start with the first objective, which is the meaning of communication barrier. What is communication barrier? Communication barriers are any form of obstacle or interference that obstruct the flow of information by preventing the synergy of the communication elements. Synergy of the communication elements refers to the cooperation or collaboration among elements of the communication process, such as the sender, message, receiver, channel, and feedback. You will recall that in our previous lesson on effective communication, it was mentioned that all elements of the communication process must cooperate with one another to ensure that the communication process is meaningful. When there is a barrier, it means there is something which interferes with the communication process and prevents meaning. The second objective of this lesson is the types of communication barrier. What are the types of communication barriers? The types of communication barriers are the internal barriers and external barrier. The internal barrier is the type of barrier that is situated inside a communicator. Examples of this type of barriers include mistrust, fear, negative attitude, tiredness, poor listening skills, or lack of interest. There are two types of internal barriers. They are psychological barrier and physiological barrier. Psychological barriers are associated with the state or condition of the mind of communicators. Examples of this type of barriers include: one, emotional status of communicators. Human emotions such as sadness, happiness, disgust, fear, or anger can interfere with and distort understanding. Number two is inclination or prejudice resulting from gender, cultural, or racial consideration against any communicator in a communication setting can prevent the establishment of shared understanding. For instance, if the receiver of a message is victimized as a result of his or her cultural background, communication will be impeded because such a person may likely not listen or respond to the message. Number three is mistrust. This is another example of psychological barrier. Mistrust implies to have no trust or confidence in someone or something. When the sender of a message in a communication context is not trusted, the receiver of the message is likely to pay little attention to the content of the message. The next is lack of interest. Just like the case of mistrust, if the receiver lacks interest in the sender or message, this will definitely affect the communication process. The second type of internal barrier is physiological in nature. That is the physiological barriers. Physiological barriers are associated with the bodily configuration of communicators. They are biologically motivated because they deal with body functions and processes. Examples of this type of barrier include the following. The first is hearing loss or problem with sound articulation. A receiver who has hearing impairment or finds it difficult to produce words accurately will certainly not be able to decode the message of a sender nor respond to it. Another example of the physiological barrier is tiredness. This can impede communication process in that a communicator, whether a sender or a receiver who is fatigued, may not be able to perform his or her role in the communication act. Having considered the internal barrier and its types, we now proceed to the second type of communication barrier, which is the external barrier. External barriers are located in the environment, choice of words, or the channel of communication. Some examples of this type of barriers include one, physical or environmental noise. These include loud drumming, sound of automobile, screaming, or chanting near the physical setting of communication. For instance, if a lecture is in session and there is the sound of an automobile, this sound will likely affect the communication process by preventing students from getting the message that is being disseminated by the lecturer. Number two is semantic barrier. This is a type of barrier that is associated with language use or the meaning of words. This may occur as a result of the wrong choice of words or the use of an impassable accent. The number three is syntactic noise. This type of barrier occurs when a sentence element or one of its members is put in a wrong place. Next is organizational barrier. Organizational barrier results from poor organization of messages. When you communicate, if you do not arrange your ideas logically in a proper sequence, the receiver of the message may find it difficult to understand your ideas. Lastly is the mechanical barrier. Mechanical barrier relates to the channel of communication. Blurred voice in a telephone conversation, for instance, delimits the amount of message that gets to the receiver. We'll go straight to the practice question for this lesson. Question 1 says, the type of barrier located within the communicator is called dash. A, internal barrier. B, external barrier. C, semantic barrier. D, mechanical barrier. Question 2 says, which of the following type of barrier relates to the mental state of the communicator? A, psychological, B, physiological, C, phonological, D, philosophical. 3. Sadness, happiness, disgust, fear, and hunger are examples of which type of barrier? A. Psychological, B. Physiological, C. Philosophical, D. Mechanical. Number 4. Which of the following pairs can be categorized under internal barriers? A. Psychological and physiological, B. Psychological and phonological, C. Physiological and mechanical, D. Phonological and physiological. Number 5. One of the following barriers deals with the body functions and processes. A. Physiological, B. Mechanical, C. Psychological, D. Organizational. Number 6. Which of the following barriers relate to the channel of communication? A. Mechanical, B. Organizational, C. Syntactic, D. Physical. Number 7. The barrier that is associated with language use or the meaning of words is dash. A. Semantic, B. Syntactic, C. Organizational, D. Mechanical. Number 8. One of the following barriers result from the poor structuring or arrangement of messages. A. Organizational, B. Mechanical, C. Physical, D. Syntactic. Number 9. The problem with sound articulation or the sense of sight is a good example of which type of barrier? A. Physiological, B. Psychological, C. Phonological, D. Organizational. Number 10. Which of the following barriers results from the wrong placement of sentence elements? A. Syntactic, B. Semantic, C. Phonological, D. Mechanical. Here is the assignment for this lesson. Question 1. What is communication barrier? 2. Explain the types of communication barriers. 3. Differentiate between the two types of internal barriers. Thank you very much for listening to this lesson. Before you click off, I would like to inform you that in our next lesson, we are going to be treating a new topic, and it is titled Language Skills. I look forward to having you on this channel. Thank you.